The way we are working this is you will get a 30-second introduction and then a 1-minute closing.
Okay.
But since you're the only one here, you pretty much have all the time. Go on.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, this small but hearty group. I'm Frank Riggs. I'm the Republican nominee for Superintendent of Public Instruction. I'm an Army vet, former police officer, successful businessman, the former CEO for 10 years of a national education nonprofit and community development financial institution, which is a mouthful, that worked with charter schools in the inner city serving predominantly low-income student populations and helped them acquire, finance, and build their school facilities. I'm also a former 3-term United States congressman, served on, I think, just about every education-related committee in the House, and chaired the House of Representatives Subcommittee on Early Childhood, Youth, and Families, which has since been renamed the Subcommittee on Early Childhood, Elementary, and Secondary Education. I'm offering my 30 years of education leadership at a time when I think we need a very strong leader in the position of Superintendent of Public Instruction.
Great, thank you for that introduction. You've got quite a history, obviously, in education, so I want to start out with what you feel the role of charter schools is in the public education system. I know you have a lot of history with that.
I do. Well, further personal history, because it's very similar to Anne Marie's. I actually started in education over 30 years ago as an elected public school district board member, served 5 years, including 2 years as the board president. But what motivated me to run for school board was the fact that I, as a police officer, I was working with juvenile offenders and at-risk students. And I realized I want to do something that is more preventative, not so reactive in nature. And that's what motivated me to run for the school board. And I've really, ever since, had this real passion for trying to expand educational opportunity to give every student the chance, the access to get a great education that prepares them for responsible adult citizenship and helps them realize their full God-given potential. To Anne Marie's question about charter schools. Charter schools are mainstream in our state, and I believe they're here to stay. I would point out that the parents of 188,000 K-12 students currently attending charter schools have chosen a charter school and its educational model, that is to say, its curriculum, an educational program, as the best and most appropriate education for their child. I also want to stipulate up front, and maybe this will trigger, I hope, some questions in interaction, that I'm a strong believer that parents have a fundamental right, and the other side of that coin, responsibility, to choose and direct their child's education. That right is codified in Arizona law under our Parental Bill of Rights statute. I don't think there's any higher authority than parents, and I don't believe that any individual or organization has the right to declare themselves the education decider or the gatekeeper for parents. That all said, even though the great majority of Arizona charter schools are tax-exempt nonprofit corporations and they're doing good work, and some of them are the highest performing schools in our state and country, we all have seen the headlines about the few bad actors in the charter school sector that give the entire sector a black eye. That's why I've called for charter school governance reform. I believe that it's a condition of any charter school getting an initial charter or a charter extension that charter schools must have a majority of disinterested parties, that is to say independent members, on their governing board. The governing board that holds the charter and is responsible for that school producing good academic and financial results. By disinterested party or independent member of the board, I mean individuals with no ties, no relationship, no financial ties whatsoever, family or business, to the charter school founder or operator. I want every charter school governing board member to have formal training on nonprofit and charter school governance, and I want them to acknowledge in writing their legal and fiduciary responsibilities, including their duty to carefully examine any kind of related party transaction to guard against the appearance, if not actual, self-dealing.
Thank you, and I was going to follow up with that, but you
I knew you were
answered
going
it within the question, so that's great. Let's move on to public schools and their role in the educational system. Do you believe there need to be any reforms with our current public school system, and what do you envision if you were elected?
Sure. Well, our public schools are clearly the backbone of our K-12 education system. The fact of the matter is the great majority of our students, 85% plus, attend a public school, a district school. And I listened to a little bit of the discussion about Prop 305, and I think someone pointed out that, of course, we have open enrollment in Arizona. We have very robust school choice, and I think that's a good thing, because I think choice and competition are good things in K-12 education. But we have, again, open enrollment, which is intra or inter-district transfer. We have magnet and theme schools that many school districts are offering, like language immersion schools or STEM schools. We have online schools. We have, again, a lot of school choice in our state, and especially in Maricopa County, where 4 out of 10 K-8 students attend a choice school. That is to say, they attend a school other than the one they would be assigned to based on their home address. So public schools, our public school districts, are the absolute backbone of our K-12 education system. Is there need for improvement? Yes. One of the first things that I want to address as Superintendent of Public Instruction is our gaping achievement gap. We know from the most recent reading results on the state standardized test called AZ Merit, 56% of our third graders are not reading proficiently. That's basic reading proficiency as measured at the third grade level. Now, let me put that a different way. Only 44% of our third graders actually scored proficient in reading, the foundation of all learning. So we obviously have to address the achievement gap. How do we do that? Well, the achievement gap is the result of many, many students not being exposed to any kind of early childhood education, not developing literacy skills even before entering school, so they have limited phonemic awareness, they have limited vocabulary, and when they enter school, they are already developmentally behind peer and grade level. And the only way that we can catch those students up and close that achievement gap is to get more resources to our public schools that serve a large number of those disadvantaged and vulnerable segments of the student population, so they can intervene early with those students and provide those students with the intensive services through individual and small group instruction that they need in order, again, to be able to catch up, and so that we, as a state, and certainly as a K-12 education system, can close that achievement gap in our state.
Thank you, and I want to follow up on something you said about getting more resources to those schools to help those students. What would be your plan for that, or what would you propose in terms of additional resources and funding?
Well, we've got some big challenges on the horizon, kind of on the immediate horizon, one of which is completely reimagining and redesigning our school finance system, which is antiquated, it's fragmented, it's piecemeal.
We have 2 audience members that want to ask
Okay.
questions. These will be the final questions.
Okay. And is riddled with disparities, our school finance system, disparities between district schools and charter schools, disparity between high wealth districts and low wealth districts, and I don't honestly know where this district would come in, but by high wealth districts with high property values and high property taxes, so they have bonding capacity versus the opposite, low wealth districts. And we have a huge disparity between our metropolitan school districts and our rural schools, which are genuinely in crisis. Because big districts have the ability to spread their operating and capital cost across multiple campuses and achieve an economy of scale that's not available to our small rural school districts. So we've got to completely redesign our school finance system, and in so doing, we've got to come up, we have to increase funding, we have to come up with kind of a formula, if you will, that provides additional funding to school districts and schools that serve large numbers, again, of the most disadvantaged and vulnerable segments of the student population. We know who they are. We're a high poverty state. We know who they are. These are students that are living in poverty or come from low income households that qualify for the federal lunch program. They're students with special needs and learning disabilities. They're certainly students who are non or limited English speaking students, English second language students, if you will, foster children, Native American students, So it's the school districts that are serving those segments of the student population who in turn make up that achievement gap that I mentioned a moment ago. It's those districts that need the additional funding.
Great, thank you for that clarification. We have some audience questions.
Yes. Can you please tell us what your position is on Proposition 305?
Of course.
Great question.
Of course, I am opposed to Prop 305, and let me tell you why. While I'm a big believer in parental school choice, Proposition 305 is a result of badly flawed legislation. Badly flawed. First of all, the notion that we would go to universal ESAs, I think, is a very misguided idea. Why do I say that? For the obvious reason, as I mentioned earlier, great majority of our students attend our traditional district schools. And why would we create a system that would be so disruptive and potentially displace so many students that it would eviscerate our school districts? Now bear this in mind, right? Our school districts represent an enormous investment over a century in infrastructure. So the taxpayer has paid for our public school district facilities to the tune of billions, if not trillions of dollars. That's why I said it will always be the backbone of our K-12 education system, number one. Number two, I advised Governor Ducey and then State Senator Lesko, now Congresswoman Lesko, that any expansion of ESAs ought to be means tested to give low-income families priority and parity, because the historical data indicates that low-income families have fewer choices. There are fewer school options in their neighborhoods and communities, and they're historically less mobile, so they're less able to take advantage of school choice than more affluent families. The dollar amount of the ESA is too low to go towards really defraying private school tuition, even though many private schools often offer tuition assistance and tuition waivers. But it's flawed, and here's the other reason it's flawed, and I heard again some of the discussion by the Prop 305 panel, but I've actually heard from families their opposition to Prop 305 because of the testing requirement. Did you know that in that legislation, a testing requirement was imposed that says any private school that enrolls 50 or more ESA-funded students must give a nationally normed test to all students, not just those that are enrolled through an ESA, all students, and publicly report the aggregate results. This would be a nationally normed test. And a lot of parents are concerned that is the camel's nose under the tent and could lead to government intrusion and regulation by the Arizona Department of Education in the private school education, many times a religious or sectarian school, that they've chosen for their child.
Great, thank you.
This next question will be the final question, and then we'll need
Do
to
the
move to
closing
meeting.
statements? Absolutely.
I believe there's a shortage of teachers
Yes, sir.
in Arizona, and I wondered if you have some ideas of how to attract and retain teachers in the classroom and make sure they're certified.
That's a great question, and obviously a very timely one. The gentleman is quite correct. We have an acute and well-documented teacher shortage now into successive years. And so I've proposed two things. One is we can never allow, again, our base level funding for K-12 education, our per pupil funding, to fall below the rate of student enrollment growth and inflation. So that creates a baseline that we have to maintain, even as we potentially supplement that funding for special purposes. Number one. Number two, as soon as I'm sworn in as Superintendent of Public Instruction, I'm going to commence a comprehensive compensation survey. A comprehensive compensation survey, that's a mouthful, but a survey of the compensation, that is to say the pay and benefits of our educators, as well as our school support personnel, because every school, good school I've ever been in, and I've been in hundreds and hundreds across the country, school support personnel play a critical role in making that school a vital and successful learning community. But I want to survey their compensation and benchmark it against neighboring states in the Mountain West and Southwest regions, and then present that data to the governor and the legislature so that they can act on it. We know we have to be competitive with those states if we're going to recruit and retain the best teachers for Arizona students. And if we can do this survey and develop out of the survey objective data, maybe we can take the whole discussion about K-12 education funding and teacher pay out of the realm of hyperpartisanship and begin to act in a bipartisan manner to address these glaring needs in our K-12 education system, again, based on objective data.
Great, thank you for that answer. We are going to wrap this up with a 60-second.
Can I take another question? Is there another question instead of my
don't-
closing statement?
No, instead of your closing statement? I'll just go for it. Give him a closing statement.
Well, I will just say that the position of Superintendent of Public Instruction is really a dual role. One is to provide the high-level executive leadership of the Arizona Department of Education and its 700-plus dedicated employees in the core mission, which is to implement and administer all state and federal policies and programs for K-12 education, and then to manage the $10 billion in local, state, and federal funding that we spend on K-12 education in our state annually. But the other part of the position is what I call the bully pulpit. The Superintendent of Public Instruction, as the chief constitutional officer for K-12 education in our state, should be an advocate on behalf of parents, students, educators, business community employers, and last but certainly not least, taxpayers in general. I have a deep, proven record of executive, educational, and legislative leadership built over 30 years. I think it ideally prepares me for the important position and responsibilities of Superintendent of Public Instruction, and I would love to earn your support and your vote.
Great, thank you. Well, that concludes our discussion with the candidate for Superintendent for Public Instruction. I want to thank Mr. Riggs for being here and taking the time to come out to Maricopa to talk to you and answer your questions.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. I'm now going to exit stage right.